I think the purpose of election observation missions is not just to watch what happens at the polls on election day, but look at the electoral process from beginning to end, and that includes the voter registration process, what happens with campaign finance, the registration of parties, so the entire process. And so it's not just about assessing election day or acting as some sort of a deterrent on election day to various kinds of shenanigans taking place. A lot of what I think election observation is and should be about is improving for the next time, as well as reporting back on what has happened in this election that's being monitored now. It's fascinating to hear the different points of view and approaches to election observation in particular that different countries have. There are some fairly dramatic differences of opinion in terms of what the role of the OSCE and ODIHR, the organization within the OSCE that does the elections work, how they should be going about their activities, what the size of the missions should be, who should be on the missions. There are actually a lot of outstanding issues that need to be worked out. In general, the ODIHR does a very good job, is considered to be incredibly trustworthy and credible in the work that they do, and there seem to be some countries who would favor limiting the access of OSCE missions, making them much too small in some countries to really be able to have a report that is honest about what the election process was really like and what the shortfallings were. I think one thing that the OSCE, as well as other organizations that do election observation, are focusing on right now, and I think this is critical, is you put out this report, you put out recommendations, and nothing really happens. And so I think there's a greater emphasis now on the recommendations, being a little bit more thoughtful about the recommendations, thinking about what the recommendations might be earlier in the process. So sort of having it as a top line rather than more of an afterthought when everything is done, as well as having some concrete follow-up actions and dialogue, not only with election administrators and politicians and members of parliament, but also importantly with civil society and domestic observation groups, all of the stakeholders, to have conversations about how can we do better in the future. I really would welcome the continued emphasis and maybe even increased emphasis on the issue of disenfranchised populations. I think that there's an incredible emphasis on having secure elections and trying to prevent fraud and multiple voting and that kind of thing, a little bit to the disadvantage of looking at those people who are not allowed to vote or can't vote or have barriers to voting, particularly national minorities and women. And so I think that we are starting to pay more attention to that. I think that we could be doing even more in that regard, and not look at the process just through an anti-fraud and security lens, but also trying to make sure that elections are as inclusive as possible as well.